All right, let's jump right in. Have you ever really thought about it? How would you build a society from the ground up? Today, we're going to crack open an ancient blueprint that does exactly that, laying out a surprisingly detailed plan for an entire nation. So, let's get into it.
I mean, it's a massive question, right? Where would you even start? Well, the book of Deuteronomy gives us this one incredibly structured answer. You could almost think of it like a constitution, a legal code, and a national mission statement all rolled into one. It was designed for a people standing right on the edge of a totally new beginning. And this whole blueprint, it really stands on three core pillars that we're going to break down. It's all about how a nation worships, how it makes sure there's justice, and how it sets up its leadership.
Okay, so let's tackle that first pillar, worship. Now, in this blueprint, everything, and I mean everything, from national identity to sheer survival, is tied to the exclusive worship of one single God. There's just no wiggle room here, no ambiguity at all.
So the law draws this super clear line in the sand. On one side, you've got what's acceptable. Things like offering a perfect, flawless sacrifice. But on the other side, a whole list of practices that are labeled detestable. And we're not just talking about a matter of taste here. Things like Asherah poles or worshiping the sun and moon, these were seen as a direct threat, a violation of the nation's core identity. The stakes for keeping things pure were, well, they were incredibly high.
So, you might be asking, what happens if someone actually crosses that line? Well, it wasn't just chaos. The process was surprisingly methodical, like a real legal procedure. First, someone makes an accusation. Then, and this is key, a thorough investigation has to happen. Guilt had to be proven, beyond a doubt. And only then was the sentence carried out, right there in public at the city gate.
But listen, this was not mob justice, far from it. The law put a critical legal standard in place. To get the ultimate penalty, you needed the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Think about that. That is a huge procedural safeguard built right into the system to protect against false accusations.
Yeah, to put it simply, one person's word was never, ever enough. And that wasn't just a minor rule. It was a shield, really. A shield against personal grudges and vendettas. It made it clear that hard evidence and corroboration were what mattered most.
And you see this phrase pop up again and again in these laws. You must purge the evil from among you. It really gets to the heart of why they were doing this. See, it wasn't just about punishing one person. It was about protecting the spiritual health, the very integrity of the whole community.
Okay, so that's worship. Now let's move on to pillar 2, justice. Because you can have all the rules for worship you want, but if you don't have a final say on justice, you're just going to get chaos, right? So this next part is all about setting up a centralized, ultimate legal authority to keep the social order.
So imagine a local court gets a case that's just too tough. Maybe a really complex murder trial, a messy lawsuit, or a serious assault. They weren't supposed to just wing it. Nope. The case got escalated, kind of like a Supreme Court today. It was made up of priests and a judge, and they were the ones who would make the final call.
And get this, their decision was absolute. This is really the cornerstone of the whole justice system. Once that high court made a ruling, that was it. End of story. No appeal. You couldn't just ignore it or go looking for a second opinion. Their word was law. Period.
So what happened if you were brazen enough to defy them? The penalty for contempt of this court was, well, it was death. Severe, unequivocal. And this applied to everyone, even a priest. It just goes to show how incredibly important it was to respect the final authority of the justice system.
And the reason for such a harsh penalty? It's spelled out really clearly. It was all about being a deterrent. When someone was executed for defying the highest court, it sent a powerful message to the entire nation. The message was, our legal system is the bedrock of our society. Do not mess with it. It will not be undermined.
All right, this brings us to our third and final pillar, leadership. Now, when you hear the words ancient king, what do you picture? Probably some all-powerful ruler, right? Absolute power? Well, the model we see here is radically different. This is not a blueprint for a tyrant. It's for a king who is, believe it or not, surprisingly limited and held accountable. Just look at these restrictions. First off, the king had to be an Israelite, one of their own. He was forbidden from building up a huge army by getting horses from, say, Egypt. He wasn't allowed to take many wives because that could lead to dodgy foreign alliances and religious compromise. And he couldn't just hoard tons of silver and gold. Every single one of these rules is a check on his power, designed to stop corruption and keep him focused on his actual job, leading his people. But it wasn't just a list of don'ts.
The king also had a list of dues, positive duties. And this is pretty wild. He had to personally, by hand, write his own copy of the law. Then he had to keep it with him, always, and read from it every single day. The whole point was to make sure he never ever thought he was above the law. The most powerful guy in the country had to be its most dedicated student. How crazy is that?
So, let's step back and put it all together. You can see how these three pillars create this really cohesive, interconnected structure, right? You've got worship, which creates a unified national identity. You've got justice, with a final authority that keeps social order. And you have leadership, where the leader is held accountable to the law. It ensures that even the king serves the law, not the other way around.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on. This ancient blueprint lays out a model where the person at the very top, the one with the most power, is actually held to the strictest standard of anyone. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What happens to a nation when its laws are written to be tougher on its rulers than on its people? It's a huge question about power, about law, and about accountability, and it feels just as relevant today as it must have been thousands of years ago.